Ladies and gentlemen, are teenagers a problem? This is not a new age topic. In fact, the same supposed problem has been apparent for all time. Socrates said, and I quote, "The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households." Adults seem to have a problem with every teenager in today's society, whether they know them well or if they have but a 5-minute meeting on a bus. What do we have to do to earn the respect of our elders? Do not be confused in my reason for asking this question. I do not desire the respect of anyone who is so naive as to judge a person without knowing them. But I feel as though the teenagers of today are being unfairly disrespected by wise elders. An example of this is shown perfectly in an article published on WordPress.com by a man in his 70s, and I quote, "The problem with young people today is that they have no respect for their elders. Back when I was a sprog, we were expected to be polite, respectful, and afraid of old people. We said please and thank you and would never have dared to call an adult by their Christian name. I personally have respect for my elders, and upon first introductions would always address them by Mr., Mrs., Ms., etc. I always say please and thank you to everyone. This is simply how I was raised. I put it to you that perhaps it is unfair to categorize all young people in the same way. How is that a showing of greater wisdom? How does that warrant my respect? I struggle with the concept that I should suffer in the eyes of my elders for the actions of others. On this, I dare say that it is the result of how a teenager has been raised. And who are teenagers raised by? Adults. The same people who express these kinds of opinions of teenagers are often people who have raised children themselves, and I'm sure when they were teenagers, their elders said the same things about them. A CBC Canada radio forum touches on this topic. The question put to Dr. S.R. Laycock, Dean of Education at University of Saskatchewan at the time, and past president of Canadian Federation of Home and School was, "Are you worried about today's teenagers?" Dr. Laycock had this to say, "Well, I'm not sure that the question of how to handle teenagers is a new problem. It appears that even primitive man had his own troubles in that respect. It seems to me that the problem of rearing children is one which each generation will have to face in the light of new conditions which confront it. There's no question, and so do parents need help in how to raise their children. Certainly, world conditions are very different from the way they were in the days of our grandfathers. So while teenagers have the age-old problem of growing up, both they and their parents have to face new problems today. I hope too that we're not going to assume that we adults are perfect specimens of humanity, and that if we can only get our teenagers to be just like us, all will be well. There's an adult problem as well as a teenage problem. They don't need more force in handling teenagers, they need more wisdom. This explains my idea perfectly. This is an adult who has an informed opinion and speaks without prejudice. This forum is from 1949. As I said before, adults have always thought of teenagers in the same way. Who would the teenagers of this time have been? They would be the elderly of today. I cannot help but think that maybe people who are older would be able to realize that it is not an age problem with teenagers. There is a lot more to the controversy than that. On this point, a recent article from Maclean's magazine on the topic of allowing teenagers in a relationship to sleep over with each other supports my argument. The article addresses the issues of teen sex and whether parents should condone it or not. The article uses real parents for its evidence. The article states that teenagers require human contact, the need to touch and be touched, and the line that determines what is appropriate for their age must be drawn by the parents. Furthermore, it is stated that a lot of parents, and I quote, "do all of these controlling things that put them at odds with their teenager rather than drawing them in closer." The point I am making is further illustrated in this article, and I quote, "Allowing her daughter's boyfriend to sleep over wasn't simply about condoning sex," she says. "It was about helping her to make an important transition into adulthood. It's about respecting intimacy, developing it at an early age and learning to appreciate it. And that requires communication, as Shelley observes, which begins with starting a conversation many parents don't want to have. A conversation many parents don't want to have. This refers to the sex talk, but what if it were topics such as drugs or alcohol abuse? How then do some teenagers have a fair shot? Not only are the teens of today struggling with new age problems such as cyberbullying or readily available drugs and alcohol, but there are parents raising them who do not know how to deal with these issues themselves, and in some cases do not even attempt to approach these topics in a reasonable fashion. Again, I ask, what chance do we have? The journey of life is one that we all must face. Teenagers are at a difficult time in their lives. Hormones become a factor. Life becomes just that much more complicated. It is the responsibility of parents and elders who claim to have some wisdom in their years to guide teenagers throughout these rough times, to instill in them the qualities that will make them prominent members of society. How is it helpful to sit back and criticize? That is not beneficial to anyone. Adults believe that if teenagers were only like they were when they were young and treated in the same way, then this problem would be solved. This just isn't so. As I said before, the world is a different place for the youth of today. On a daily basis, teens must face decisions such as whether or not to indulge in drug use or whether or not to get drunk. Further examples of new age teenage difficulties include cyberbullying. It is possible to be bullied or insulted over the internet or with the use of mobile phones in one's own home. This certainly was not possible in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. Adults of today have not had to face these problems in the same way that teenagers have. In fact, teen suicide is becoming an increasing issue. A report from Science Daily from 2007 had this to say, and I quote, "Following a decline of more than 28%, the suicide rate for 10 to 24-year-olds increased by 8%, the largest single-year rise in 15 years. Statistics from this same report show that for 15 to 19-year-old females, the rate increased from 2.66 to 3.52 per 100,000 people. And for 15 to 19-year-old males, the rate increased from 11.61 to 12.65 per 100,000 people. All of a sudden, the life of the modern teenager doesn't seem quite as easy as it was back in your day, does it? Rest assured that snide remarks and disrespect from adults does not help the life of a teenager. Perhaps if the older generations were to forget about their own agenda of making society as it was when they were growing up and helped today's youth on their life's journey, these numbers would not be so high and in fact would decrease. It is as though the judgmental adults in today's society do not have the ability to consider the stresses and difficulties teenagers are faced with today. These people continue to judge and remain strong with the opinion that teenagers are simply rude and unpleasant by nature. The point must be reiterated that in most cases, teenagers are raised by adults. This teenage problem does not occur naturally. So why is it so? I believe adults should take a good look in the mirror. They will find the answer.